Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me today for this online forum presentation of Sockeye Fishing 101. I want to give you a brief overview of what we're going to talk about here so that way you don't get too far into this video and decide it's not for you. This tutorial is specifically designed for people who either have very limited fishing sockeye experience or who've never done it at all. So if you've been there, done that, this presentation might not be geared for someone like you. However, if you want to stick around, happy to have you. I'll introduce myself. My name is Ryan Reagan. I work for Alaska Department of Fish and Game in the Division of Sport Fish. I'm a program coordinator, and I've fished sockeye in numerous places in the state of Alaska. And I will put a caveat here in saying that this presentation is going to cover some primary popular sockeye fisheries that are road accessible, but however the techniques that we're going to cover can be conveyed to other sockeye fisheries. Also, we're really going to be focusing on targeting sockeye in flowing fresh water. There's going to be some talk in here about where to go and how to target them in salt water, but for the most part, what we're talking about today is how to target sockeye in fresh flowing waters. All right, so let's get started. All right, so sockeye are also referred to as red salmon. All 5 species of Pacific salmon that are native to the freshwaters of Alaska have multiple names. You'll hear a king referred to as a chinook. You'll hear a chum salmon referred to sometimes as a dog salmon. A pink is a humpy. A silver is a coho. The sockeye is more commonly referred to as a red salmon, and they are an anadromous fish, which means they begin their life in fresh water, and at a point in their early stage of development, they come up out of the gravel after having hatched from the egg, and they'll be in fresh water for a specific amount of time, and they'll migrate to the ocean where they'll continue to feed and grow into their adult form. And once they reach that point, they're going to return back to the stream that they began their life in. Okay, that's what the term anadromous means. So sockeye can spend 1 to 4 years in fresh water and 1 to 3 years in the ocean. And when they're in the fresh water, they're primarily a smaller fish. Right, they're not growing to those fish that we like to target when they're returning adults. All right, they're going to be sort of a smaller fish. They're feeding on various small crustaceans and zooplanktons in the freshwaters. And they are one of the smaller species of Pacific salmon, and they do measure around 18 to 31 inches in length and can weigh anywhere from 4 to 15 pounds. In Alaska, most sockeye salmon return to spawn in June and July in freshwater drainages that contain 1 or more lakes. That's an important factor there. When sockeye are rearing, primarily they're going to, as adults, spawn in flowing waters. And then when the young come up out of the gravel beds after hatching from the eggs, those fry, as they're referred to, will move into lakes. So realistically, when you're looking for areas to target sockeye that you've never been to or maybe you've never heard of, you can always check and see, well, is there a lake associated with this stream or this drainage, and perhaps there might be a run of sockeye in there. So spawning itself usually occurs in rivers, streams, and upwelling areas along lake beaches. During this time, 2,000 to 5,000 eggs are deposited in 1 or more reds, which the female digs with her tail. A red is what is referred to as a nest. So the female will, after partnering up with, the female will come and dig a nest in the gravel, and it's basically an indentation like that. And as the female and the male salmon spawn, they'll get above that red, spawn, and she deposits those eggs into that red. It's REDD, and then she'll cover those eggs up, and those eggs will incubate in complete darkness for a specific amount of time. And then when they go through the first stages of development, which is the egg, the eyed egg, they'll develop into alevin, and then after they've buttoned up, they will come out of the gravel as fry. You can see here, this is a map showing the sockeye salmon range in Alaska. So it's quite extensive, and this does obviously cover both salt and fresh water. So the largest sockeye salmon populations in the state are going to be occurring in the Kvichak, the Naknek, Ugashik, Igigik, and Nushagak rivers that flow into Alaska's Bristol Bay. If you've spent any time in Alaska, you've more than likely heard about Bristol Bay, and the sockeye runs in Bristol Bay are quite prolific. They can run in the numbers of the tens of millions of fish. And you can see, I've got a graphic here showing this is part of the Wood River system. So we've got down here on the south, we've got Lake Aleknagik, Lake Nurka, Lake Beverly, and Lake Kulik. So this is just one example of a drainage or a system that supports numerous numbers of sockeye that are returned each year. And also there's a heavy commercial fishing that occurs over in Bristol Bay in the saltwater. We'll talk about that in a second. So again, it's the largest harvest of sockeye in the world, commercial harvest, and it can anywhere from 10 to 30 million sockeye salmon may be caught each year during a short, intensive fishery lasting only a few weeks. And they're primarily caught there through nets. Having said that, there are opportunities over there to recreational or sport fish using a rod and reel, but primarily the sockeye that are intercepted prior to going into the rivers are done for commercial purposes. And you can see this is a photo of sockeye in a gill net. So how do you identify sockeye? As I mentioned earlier, there are 5 different species of Pacific salmon native to the freshwaters of Alaska. Sockeye, if you've never seen an adult sockeye, it's important to do some pre-studying before you go out and try to target these fish. You really want to know what they look like. And I will say that all salmon undergo physical changes as they migrate from the ocean back into their native freshwater streams to spawn. So when they're in the ocean, they're quite silvery. There's not a lot of other physical colorations on the fish, but as they begin to enter the process, the spawning phase, the adult spawning phase, their bodies undergo physical changes. In the case of sockeye, the sockeye will develop a deep reddish or even maroon coloration. The males of the sockeye will develop a pronounced hump, kind of more toward their head and up on what I would refer to as their shoulders. And the males often will develop a pronounced kype, K-Y-P-E. It's their mouth. Their mouth will kind of, and I'll show you some photos here in a second of what that looks like. But the kype is really something that is used by the males when they're competing for spawning opportunities for females. So one thing you want to take into consideration here is sockeye don't typically have any identifiable spots, black spots on their back or on their tail. I shouldn't say this is like a 100%. They never have spots. It's just the most common featuristic of a sockeye, adult, marine, fresh, sockeye is a lack of spots, okay? So we'll talk about that a little bit more. So here's a sockeye in the marine phase, okay? You can see silvery coloration. You'll see over here the nice wide tail. And again, no real identifiable spots on this fish. If we had this fish in front of us here, we would just be looking, and you might see on here maybe occasionally some very, very small black spotting that occurs up in here that almost looks like grains of sand, and even around there. Now, this image shows a female sockeye salmon in full adult spawning coloration. You can see here that there's been a pretty significant change. We've seen change basically of color throughout the body. All right, the head turns a greenish color, olive drab color. We see the body turning this deep maroon red. We see the tail kind of matching the coloration of the head. All right, and this female has entered her spawning phase, and she's ready to spawn. And after spawning all these Pacific salmon that are native to Alaska, they die. All right, so once this fish is spawned, she's going to complete her life cycle, and she'll basically, her body will just decompose to the point where she'll no longer be alive, and then the body floats downstream or gets eaten by birds and bears, and that process is actually extremely helpful for the river system itself. There's a lot of nutrients still contained in the bodies of these fish after they die, and that decomposition really that gets spread out can really benefit an ecosystem. So as you can see here, this is a photo of a male sockeye right here, and next to a female sockeye salmon. And I think this is a very wonderful photo here by Mark Emery. And what we see here is this is the male. You can see this is the kype I was referring to, that very developed and pronounced jaw that forms. The golden eye is another thing you can look for on these sockeye, but I want to point out the fact that look at this nice curvature of this hump right here. Okay, that's very indicative of the male sockeye. The females don't really get that as much. Now, for those who are aware of our Pacific salmon here in Alaska, there's the pink salmon. Now, male pink salmon also develop a pretty pronounced hump on their back. However, the coloration, spawning coloration of a pink salmon is completely different than a sockeye. So, and I'm going to give you some resources here to help you in the future, to help you identify your fish. A couple of things you want to make sure when you're identifying your fish is, it's going to keep you within compliance with the regulations in the event that you only have a certain number of a specific kind of sockeye or salmon that you can keep, that you can retain per day as an angler. And it's also going to help you if, like, say, for example, there's an area where you can only keep sockeye and you can't keep kings. Well, the further you are in development of your identification of salmon skills, is going to help you just remain in compliance. What I always tell people is if you are not 100% sure, let the fish go. It's better for you to let it go than to doubt and potentially get yourself into a situation. So what we've done is we've developed what we call here the Alaska Salmon Identification and Fishing Guide. Now, this resource is available in print format at some of our offices. It's also available in a PDF format on this web address right here. You're going to hear me refer to this web address a couple of times in this presentation because we've really compiled a lot of information on this particular URL right here. So this book covers basically how to identify the 5 different species of Pacific salmon native to Alaska. And it also gives you some other resources. So after this presentation, if you want to go seek this one out, go to this website, and it's under a title called Publications. So what do sockeye eat? That's a very big question that a lot of folks want to know. So while they're in freshwater, juvenile sockeye feed mainly on zooplankton. That's tiny floating animals and small shrimp-like crustaceans and even insects. In the ocean, sockeye continue to feed on zooplankton, but also eat larval, small adult fishes, occasionally squid, shrimp, krill, that kind of stuff, right? They're not really a fish that's when I think of a silver salmon or a king or Chinook salmon, they're highly predatory. They're going after fish like herring and hooligan and salmons and stuff like that, and they're actively pursuing those big bait balls. Well, sockeye don't really do that. They're not that type of fish. So you can see here, this is just a small crustacean that a sockeye could potentially be feeding on in the ocean, as are these. We're going to talk a little bit about flies to target sockeye. And this right here, we'll get to it later. I'm putting this here because I want to say that this mimics, this fly here is called a crystal shrimp fly. This fly is designed to mimic natural sockeye forage, and we're going to get to talking about the importance of that here in a second. So subsistence sport and personally used fisheries for sockeye. If you're a resident of Alaska, you can participate in personal use and subsistence fisheries in certain areas if they're open. Sometimes you need a permit. You really want to be keyed in on that. This presentation is not going to be talking about how to go dip netting or where the subsistence opportunities are. Sport fisheries are open to residents of Alaska as well as non-residents. So as long as they have a license, if they need one. And if you ever have any questions on what residency is, who needs a license, you can always contact our Sports Fish Information Center. Okay, so as far as licenses go, that's sort of neither here nor there, but we do get a lot of questions about daily bag and possession limits for fish, and I can give you a few brief overviews here, but this is not a presentation to cover full regulations about fishing, so I want to encourage you, if you ever have questions, get the regulation book first, read it to the best, and if you still have questions, call our offices. That's what we're there to do. We're here to help you. I would advise not to go to, say, someone on social media first. I would say go to Fish and Game first to get the answer you're seeking. So personal use fisheries, and I don't really want to talk too much about them, but there are examples of personal use fisheries that are primarily geared toward sockeye harvest. That main one would be the Kenai River dipnet fishery. There's the Kasilof River dipnet fishery, and there is the Copper River personal use and subsistence fishery. But I'm going to speed through these here because I don't know that I want to spend too much time on them. What I do want to talk about is your primary, more popular roadside sockeye fisheries. Okay, and based on statewide harvest survey data, it's clear that the Upper Kenai and the Russian River and the Kenai River drainage in general is probably the most heavily fished sockeye sport fishery in the state. So run timing, they typically start showing up in the Kenai River around the middle to end of May. Usually around Memorial Day, you can find them in there. It's a good time. But the Upper Kenai and the Russian River, they don't open to fishing until the 11th of June. So this is premiering on June 10th. So so tomorrow, June 11th, the Upper Kenai and Russian River will open by regulation. So what we do is we break these runs down into what we call the first run and second run. And the first run fish, basically from now until July 1, those first run sockeye are primarily tributary spawners. So they're primarily going to be seeking out tributaries of the main stem Kenai River, and they're going to go deposit their eggs and complete their life cycle in those tributaries. So the Russian River is probably one of the most popular tributaries that sockeye spawn in, and it's probably probably the most popular tributary of the Kenai that people go target sockeye in. So just some older data, I guess 2017 is the most recent that I could find when I did this, but there's roughly almost 50,000 days fish on the Russian with a harvest of over 37,000 sockeye. Now that data can go, it's maybe updated now, I have to go and look, but you can see the Upper Kenai itself, roughly 38,000 days fished with 13,000 anglers and a harvest of over 21,000 sockeye. That's non-guided, and that was information from the statewide harvest survey. This is an example of what we call the Upper Kenai River main stem specifically. And you can see over here is Kenai Lake. The Upper Kenai River drains from Kenai Lake and it goes into Skilak Lake. So the water is going this way. All right. And you'll see here that the Russian River is a tributary that dumps into Upper Kenai River around, we'll say, River Mile 74 because it's visible right there. And there, as far as accessibility goes, there's trail systems all along the Russian River that you can go and access. However, a lot of people will use drift boats and float in the Upper Kenai. It's a beautiful float. There are opportunities to access areas on the Upper Kenai via the road system, but if you ever get the chance to float the Upper Kenai River any time of year, it's a beautiful float. So there's the Kenai River, or Russian Kenai River confluence, which I pointed out a minute ago. And the main point I want to make here is that regulations for fishing on the Upper Kenai, including the Russian River, they allow for the use of only one unbaited single hook artificial fly or lure, and a gap between point and shake can't exceed 3/8 of an inch. Okay. Now, a couple years ago, we started adding these graphics in our sport fish regulations summary booklet for South Central. All right, so we wanted to give anglers the best option here, because some folks will grab a hook and they'll say, is this 3/8 inch gap? And say, well, you got to go and find a tape measure. So we try to make it more useful and easier for anglers. So we started adding these graphics. Now, if you were to use this on your computer screen as a graphic, obviously that's not going to conform to 3/8 of an inch. In the regulation book, if you grab a copy, you'll find this graphic, and I'm going to show you how to use those. So right here, what we're looking at here is the gap between the point of the hook, which is right here, and the shank of the hook, which is right here. That gap right there cannot exceed 3/8 of an inch in order to be legal to use in the Upper Kenai or the Russian. Okay, so you can see here, as this is laid down in here, that one is good to go. Now this one, on the other hand, you can see there's your point, there's your shank, and that far exceeds 3/8 of an inch. So this particular hook, or anything that exceeded that hook gap, wouldn't be legal to use in that area. And by the way, only one of those hooks can be used on your line. All right, so here's the Russian River. So the Russian River, as I said, dumps into the Upper Kenai, and you can see this yellow section right here is the area that's open to fishing for sockeye as of June 11th. Okay, now there's a considerable amount of river here to fish, but it does, the area that's open to fishing does terminate right here around these markers, and that's going to be about 600 yards below the Russian River Falls. And again, there's an extensive trail system that runs all along here. You can walk, you can, at certain points, you can take a bike in here on on the upper Russian Trail. But for you to access this, primary gear, I would say waders would be good. There's pretty extensive system of black and brown bears that frequent this river during the salmon runs. So having something to protect yourself, bear spray, or a firearm, or whatever you're most comfortable with, is something to have. And the walking isn't always easy. Sometimes the water's up and it can push toward the bank, but there's several different. There's one main access spot right down toward the lower section of the river, the Russian River Campground, which you can go into, and then you can access that. There's also the Russian River Ferry, which is a ferry system that basically traverses the Upper Kenai River. It's you'll see there's a parking lot down there, and you can traverse the Kenai through that, and then you can access the Russian that way. So a couple different ways to access that. We do have a weir on Lower Russian, the outlet of Lower Russian Lake, which is used to count sockeye passing through, and I'll show you how to find fish counts here in a second. So one question we get is, if I'm looking at the fish counts on the Lower Kenai River, which is that sonar is around River Mile 19. A lot of folks want to know, how long does it take for those sockeye that get counted there to make it up to the Russian River? Well, it can depend. It's highly variable on conditions. However, what we normally say is, anywhere from 7 to 10 days. This can be determined by how fast those fish are going. This can be determined on water levels. So don't take it as, oh, okay, I see, on the sonar in the Lower Kenai that got 50,000 fish. Well, it doesn't mean they're all going up to the Russian. It doesn't mean they're all going to the upper. But if you were to ask that, that's how we normally would say that. So this is an example here of some areas around the Russian that have specific, even further regulations on them. So right here is what we call a sanctuary. And as I mentioned, there's a Kenai Russian River ferry crossing that goes right here. So this sanctuary There's the Russian right there. A lot of times what will happen is when these sockeye come in here, they'll kind of sit around here in this sanctuary area before they make their migration up to the Russian. So this area by regulation opens to fishing later than say this area, the Russian, and this area below the Kenai River Ferry. The fish in here are meant to just kind of be there. If they stack up way too much and people were out there fishing them, it could impact the fishery negatively. However, if in certain years we know that there's a lot of sockeye, and there's sometimes, you know, we can open this up earlier through emergency order, and I'll talk about emergency orders more toward the end of this. If you've never heard that term, I highly suggest getting keyed in on what we do. But so anyway, this is the sanctuary, that's the Russian, and I just wanted to point this out here because this does open later by regulation than the Russian and the rest of the upper does. Let's talk about the Kenai River. So I already mentioned that the sonar is located roughly at river mile 19, and the run is broken into first run and second run. The second run counts begin around July 1. So you're going to see much before that, but this run is much more abundant than first run. So as I said, those first run fish are primarily going to the Russian River. I'll show you how to access fish counts, and you can look at those, and sometimes our counts don't always start on the exact same day that it did maybe the year or two before, but I'll show you guys that in a second here. So the first run is managed through the end of June. The second run management begins July 1. And this is how you find your daily fish counts. I'll show you how to access fish counts from our website. This is the main website for Fish and Game is adfg.alaska.gov. Okay, and if you go there, you're going to see something to this effect here. You're going to have home, fishing, hunting, subsistence, etc. across the top. If you come over and hover over the word fishing, drop down, hover over the word sport, don't click on it. Come down here, hover over fish counts and click on that. This is going to give you the fish counts page. We've got the top 20 searches here based on popularity of what people are searching. We've also got a drop-down menu here showing you all the other areas of the state of Alaska that have management counting tools on them, whether it be a weir, sonar, you know, however we're counting fish. You can go there and explore that. We'll take, for example, the Copper River, because it seems the most popular fish count search right now is Copper River for sockeye. When you go here, you'll see that this is a data comparison between 2020 and 2019. The black mark, or the black line, is 2020. The blue line is the 2019 run. You've got your cumulative total for 2019 here in the blue, a cumulative total for 2020 right here, and a daily count right here, and then you've got your dates right here. So looking at this, you can see that, you know, basically we started seeing fish on May 19th. Saw 763 that day, and as of, you know, that same time last year, well, that's what the count was, so it's considerably lower. But you can see on the next day we saw 1,600, and that's your cumulative. So again, that's going to increase daily as we see more fish coming in there. So you can go check those out. You can obviously see your Russian River early run sockeye if we click on that one. We haven't seen any fish yet this year. Of course, you know, we're indicating June 6th right here as a potential date to start counting fish. So, you know, you can by the time this slideshow, this presentation is done, we may be seeing some fish in there. So, but anyway, that's your cumulative total for 2019 right here in the blue. And you can also find information about the biological and sustainable escapement goals for sockeye and kind of what that means. You can read that up in here. And if you have any questions, you're always welcome to call this number right here. This is Soldotna office. And anyway, there's a lot of great information on there. And if you want to compare back-to-back years, you can go click here. I'm just holding my shift key down and clicking on each one of those. So if I select 3 years in a row, what I'm going to get is a comparison graph chart for those 3 years. So you can see 2017 green line, 18 blue line, 19 black line, and again compiled in here. Fish counts are an extremely helpful tool for you. We'll get back to the presentation. And again, if you want to just click on something fast, there. All right, then you got the middle and lower Kenai River, right? So this is Ski Lac Lake. This is the outlet of Ski Lac, and this is Cook Inlet. This is salt water, and this is the Kenai River draining from Ski Lac Lake down into Cook Inlet. It's a pretty extensive system right here. Lots of road accessible opportunities, lots of lodges and whatnot down here, private and public campgrounds that you can access and fish. You can also float it in a drift boat. Sockeye do spawn kind of throughout this system in here. Kasilof River is another popular sockeye fishery down there on the Kenai Peninsula. You've got Tustamina Lake up here, and that drains, creates Kasilof River, which drains into Cook Inlet. As far as sockeye fishing goes on here, there's limited shore access, and I think the best way, if you want to go target sockeye, is to either go with a guide, or if you have a drift boat and some boating knowledge yourself, you can traverse this river, basically jumping in from the bridge and going down. But again, if you've never done it, I would really recommend going with a guide. We've already covered how to find fish counts, but this here is a live link, and I'll just cruise over that. Another sockeye opportunity in South Central Alaska is the Resurrection River down in Seward. All right, so the Resurrection River is a river that basically it's quite glaciated. So if you go down there, I wouldn't expect a clear stream. It's pretty heavily glaciated. But the main thing here I want to point out is it drains into Resurrection Bay. And this, on all rivers, there's a delineation between saltwater and freshwater. And we've made it such that the delineation between salt and freshwater here is outlined by markers that are on the Resurrection River itself. This is a primarily popular fishery in like late May and early June. People will come down off Nash Road, and there's a couple different options to access the salt water down here, what we call the mouth. So they'll come down here, and in the salt water you can snag, okay? And so you're going to see a lot of people down here using snagging hooks, weighted treble hooks, and that's what they're doing. They're going for sockeye. Now fishing is open in the freshwater above the signs and up to this bridge as of June 16th. But you can see here, it's only one single hook artificial lure or fly that's allowed up in here. Your limits for sockeye are lower than they are right here in the saltwater. So primarily fishing in the Resurrection River occurs down here. We do see people each year, either they miss these signs or they're just really not aware. But they'll go up in here with their snagging hook, with their weighted treble hook, and they end up finding themselves on the wrong side of the law. And so it's very important to maintain awareness of where those markers are, okay? Because if you go up in here and you're snagging, well, snagging is not open in freshwater, it's only open in the saltwater down here. And if you're in there with a weighted treble hook, that's illegal gear. So these are hatchery raised sockeye, raised at Trail Lakes Hatchery and released at various sites, including Bear Lake. Anglers can find returning sockeye in this area beginning in mid to late May to run peaks around mid-June. And when the sockeye pile in there, they seemingly pile in there pretty strong. So you'll see a lot of people, when sockeye are running strong in Seward or Res Bay, tons of people are down there. And the main thing, what I would say about that too, in terms of popularity of these fisheries is, when the sockeye are in, no matter where you're fishing, I wouldn't expect this quiet solitude. You're going to have people And safety is a huge precaution, especially down here when you have people winging those weighted treble hooks. You want to make sure you're maintaining distance from people so you make sure you're safe and they're safe. And again, snagging is only allowed in saltwater. And what I mean by snagging is if you hook a fish anywhere then inside of its mouth, that would be considered a snag fish. So in freshwater, in order for a fish to be retained legally, the hook has to go into and be inside of the fish's mouth. Right? In saltwater, it can be hooked anywhere, and that's why those people are using weighted treble hooks. Clutina River is another option that's on the road system. It is a tributary of the Copper River, and on most years, it's a really good place to go and target sockeye. You typically find sockeye around, the first to third week in June in there. The water is glaciated and visibility is limited during that time of year when the runoff is occurring. And we've got an exceptional video on our YouTube channel on how to fish the Clutina River for red salmon. So I'm not going to talk too much about this because I really encourage you to go to this video and watch it. Even if you're not going to go to Clutina, some of the pointers that we cover in this video can be conveyed to the Russian, can be the Kenai. It's a really great video to watch if you've never fished for sockeye before. But this is the Clutina River, a section lower toward where it dumps into Copper River here. This is Copper Center, a town called Copper Center. There's a couple of guide and private campground operations that occur right here on the banks of the river. There is trail access, basically from this side of the bridge down through here, and you can kind of walk in there. Camping occurs mostly, at these areas up in here, but and you can fish from shore from the campground. So if you are into just camping, hanging out with family or friends or whatever, Clutina is a really good option. I would just say, if you've never been there, look into it. And I'll show you some rigs on what I use when I go to Clutina is what I use when I go to Russian or something like that. So let's talk about when fishing for sockeye. Again, be safe and give each angler as much room as possible. Sometimes that, especially on the Russian and the Kenai, may seem like like you're just packed in there shoulder to shoulder. But the main thing is when you're doing that, be safe, be ethical, be responsible. Try not to walk directly behind people when they're casting. If someone's in the mode of casting toward fish, they're probably not thinking what's behind them. But so it's like defensive driving. Just be a defensive angler when you're out there. But it's take the responsibility on yourself to practice safe practices rather than think somebody else is going to be doing it for you, because sometimes people get in fish mode and it can be hard for them to pay attention to what's going on around them. When you hook a fish, be vocal. Say fish on, especially if there's people around. Most people, when someone else hooks a fish, they're going to get out of the way. They're going to maybe even grab a net, help you with that fish. And if you don't yell fish on and that fish goes downstream, it can get tangled up in people's lines, and it just creates kind of an ordeal. Land your fish as quickly as you can. Always be bear aware and keep your fish on a stringer. When I say close by, I mean close by. I mean like I'd say with even like attach it to your wading belt. Just make sure somebody's watching those fish. Even if you go and tie your stringer to a log or something, and just keep especially if you're on a Russian, keep those fish in someone's view basically at all times. We don't want to educate bears or other critters that they can just come down there and take somebody's fish off of a stringer. So keep those fish really close by to you. And if you see a potential violation, this is another question we get a lot. You can call the Alaska Wildlife Troopers. They're the enforcement branch. They do all the enforcement for fisheries and wildlife violations. So certain fish and game employees are deputized and can enforce, but primarily enforcement is going to come from AWT. And those numbers for AWT can be found online. So any potential violation should be reported to Alaska Wildlife Troopers. All right, so let's get into how to fish for sockeye. And before we do this, what I want to do is I want to start by talking about rod and reel options. And I've got a video here that we're going to watch where I detail 3 different types of rods that you can use to target sockeye. So let's watch that video now. Let's talk about the rod and reel setup that's going to be most effective for you when targeting sockeye. You've got a couple options when you go to your local bait and tackle store, or if you order online, whatever your preference is. You can do a spinning reel or a bait cast style reel. If you're just getting into fishing, and if you're just getting into sockeye fishing and you've never had experience casting a bait caster, I'd really recommend doing an open face spin reel as opposed to the bait caster. The bait caster is a good reel. It just takes a little bit more time to get used to it. If you've never cast those before, your spinning reel, you're going to save yourself a lot of time and hassle. So let's take a quick look at some of the rods and reel setups that I use when I go sockeye fishing. When you go to select a rod, really what you want to look for is length and stiffness of the rod. So I typically look for about a 7.5 to 9 foot rod, and I'm looking for a fast action, a medium to heavy type rod. The reason I'm doing that, I want a rod with a stiff backbone. If your rod is designed to catch panfish or small trout in like a lake, you're really not going to want to take that out fishing for sockeye because it's not going to be enough rod to handle those fish. Those fish are in current, and then when they get into the current, you really want to get them out of that current by utilizing your rod and reel setup. What I'm holding right here is an 8'6" medium heavy rod. This reel that I have on it is a 5000 series reel, and it's spooled with about 65-pound test braided line. This is probably overkill for most sockeye applications, but in truth, you can't really go overkill with sockeye because when you hook those fish, you're basically not really finessing them. You just want to get them out of the water onto the bank and onto your stringer. So I can use this rod for sockeye, and I can go and I can also fish for king salmon with this rod. So this is a very versatile rod for me to have in my arsenal. In my hand here, I have a 7-foot rod. Now this here is a fast action rod, a little bit light in my opinion for sockeye, but what I want to demonstrate here is the smaller handle on this rod. As you can see with the previous ones that I showed, the cork handle there, you can see it's a little bit smaller. I want to point this one out to use for kids or anybody who's of smaller frame who doesn't want to handle a heavier rod like that. This is a fine rod to use. Okay, when you're using this, it says a 4000 series reel on it. That the braided line that's on here is a 35-pound test braid. It'd be good for going to the Russian. You could use this on Clutina, even on the Kenai River. And again, what you're looking at here is just you've got a 7-foot rod, nice stiff backbone. It's fully capable of landing sockeye in those streams that I just mentioned. I wouldn't really put this against kings or things like that. With those bigger fish, probably not. Again, you could do it. It just takes a little bit more time to adjust to learning how to play those fish. So a good sockeye rod for a kid or someone of a lower frame who doesn't want to sling that heavy rod all day. The last rod I'm going to show you is a bait cast style rod. This here is a 9-foot rod, very stiff action rod, perfectly capable of all those applications. The only downfall is if you've never used one of these types of reels before, there's a little bit of a learning curve that you've got to overcome in order to get proficient with these. That's why I mentioned the spinning reel is probably your better option if you're just getting into this. But if you've got one of these laying around and it's available to you, and take it out there, give it a shot. These are great with your bait cast style reels. You really want to pay attention to the size, the level of drag, and really the overall durability. As I mentioned before, these Bantams are bulletproof. I love them, and I've caught tons of fish on them. That's one of my go-to sockeye reels. Let's talk about using a fly rod to target sockeye. My suggestion is to not use anything less than an 8-weight when you're targeting sockeye in most rivers in the state of Alaska, including the Russian, the Kenai, Clutina, wherever you're going to go. Start your baseline fly rod at a minimum of an 8-weight. That's my suggestion. You're going to hear probably a lot of discussion on that. Some folks can say I can get by with a 6-weight. If you can do it, if you're an experienced fly angler,
great. You know, but if you're just getting into this and you want to target sockeye using a fly rod, start with an 8 weight. This here happens to be a 9-foot 9 weight, and as you can see, I've got here spooled on my reel monofilament. I've taken a traditional fly reel and I've taken all the backing off, I've taken all the fly line off, all the floating fly line that I had on this at one time, and I've run a spool of, this happens to be 25-pound test Maxima monofilament line. The reason I do that is because of control, because of line control. When you're sockeye fishing, you're gonna find that one of the main challenges you're gonna face is controlling that line. What I found with using floating fly line when I'm sockeye fishing is I have a short section of leader coming off of my fly line, and that line, no matter how much weight I'm putting on that section of leader, that fly line, it naturally wants to stay suspended. I don't really want it to do that. I want that line to get down there as fast as it can and just tick along the bottom. And that's why I've taken all the fly line off, and this is why I'm running a monofilament on a fly reel.
All right, as we covered in the video here, just want to kind of briefly go over it again. Spinning or casting, a strong 7 to 9 foot rod, 20 to 25 pound test mono or fluoro. And if you're running braided line, use a leader. You know, a fly rod, 8 to 10 weight. You can even go higher if you want, 9 foot. Floating or sink tip lines will work. However, like I say, you know, it's floating line, especially in areas where the creek isn't really that wide and you're not casting really, you know, too terribly far. But still, I think floating lines, I just would avoid them when fishing, when targeting sockeye in flowing waters. You know, at minimum, try a sink tip. But if you can, get a spare spool and throw some mono on it. You know, like I showed in that video with the fly rod. I've got a spool of Maxima monofilament line on there, and it just really helps with line control. So let's talk about what we're going to use to target sockeye. And again, I want to use this video here to show you some sockeye fly options, and I'll talk about the traditional or more common perceptions of what to use to target sockeye. So let's watch that video now.
For the most part, there's two traditional thoughts here on what to use to target sockeye in flowing fresh water. One is yarn on a hook, and basically you're just doing your flip cast and you're trying to hook the fish, get that hook inside of the fish's mouth, okay? Another thought is to use artificial flies that mimic natural forage for the fish themselves, all right? So small shrimp flies are key to your fly arsenal when you're targeting sockeye. Before me here, I have my fly box looking somewhat bare from last year. I haven't yet tied enough flies to go out and target fish yet this year. But you can see here, the flies in this box are smaller flies. Okay, they're not these huge Russian River flies with the bucktail on them, which again you can use. I prefer to not use that style. Those flies, in my opinion, are not getting the sockeye to bite at the fly or bite the fly. You're basically just trying to hook the fish in the mouth using those. If you mimic the sockeye's natural forage, you're going to be better poised to have that sockeye actually bite your offering, okay? A lot of people will tell you that sockeye when in fresh water do not bite. That's, in my opinion, not true. When they're force-fed certain flies or certain materials, of course they're not going to bite it. Or when they're spooked because they're getting a lot of lead thrown at them. You know, they're like most other fish, where if they're in a state of panic, they're not going to readily feed. Even those instincts are going to be kind of shut off. Their main thing they're going to go into is basically kind of survival mode. And you see it a lot at the Russian River. Those fish that hang out in the sanctuary, and a lot of people will block that area off and they'll be slapping the water with lead. Those fish kind of do get freaked out. However, when you're in an area and you have sockeye that are schooled up and they're swimming along, using these shrimp flies is an extremely effective way to target fish and to get them to be hooked in the mouth almost 100% of the time. So I would recommend highly that you add small shrimp flies, and there are many options out there to choose from. Add small shrimp flies to your fly fishing arsenal for sockeye, and I don't think you're going to be disappointed.
All right, so after the video here, I'll show you some more. I'll show you some more examples of those flies here. So again, crystal shrimp, comet flies. This is a comet. It's a Russian river fly. Again, these are commercially available. I have many sporting goods stores, and even like Walmart and Fred Meyer carries these. These guys are a little bit more specific and can be found at certain sporting good locations, or if you're in fly tire, search sockeye fly patterns for Alaska on Google and you'll find a number of different options, and chances are you're going to even see some of these on there. There's a video about how to tie a crystal shrimp on our YouTube channel, which you can watch that too. So the bucktail, this is bucktail right here. This is just crystal flash, but this is an extremely popular fly for the Russian, the Kenai. I mean, just even for fishing for sockeye in general, anywhere. You've got this long shanked hook covered by, this is in this case, this is deer hair. And as I mentioned before, these fish really aren't biting this. The theory behind this fly is you're going to use it to get the hook to go into the fish's mouth. Sometimes these fish, you know, they may take a swing at these just out of anger or whatever, but you know, for the most part, people using these flies are trying to get the hook to go and just do what some people refer to as flossing, where it basically just goes into the fish's mouth. Okay, so that's what those styles are used for. This doesn't mimic natural sockeye forage. All right, and as I mentioned, the shrimp fly, in my opinion, leads to more in the mouth hook sets than say something like this does. However, when the fish are stacked, like, and you get really good at what you're doing for sockeye, like, you can use these flies. I'm not saying they don't work. I'm just saying, you know, try those shrimp flies too. Okay, we're going to talk about other options in a second here. Some people will back troll or cast gear for sockeye in, say, lakes, and you know, we'd probably cut this off, but and use just a single hook. But small hot shot type, you know, plugs will catch sockeye. You know, again, this is we're going to look at these here, but this is a shrimp fly or crystal shrimp style fly tied on a circle hook. I just wanted to show that. And this is a circle hook here, and that's just an octopus hook. But now that we've talked about hooks, let's watch a video on some hook options for sockeye.
As far as a hook goes for sockeye, you really don't need to use a treble hook. That's first and foremost. If you're in fresh water and it's flowing water, I've seen people out, you know, casting Vibrexes and stuff like that, and they can do that. It's just that if you're targeting sockeye, your most effective way is with one single hook. So if I'm going to a place, say like Clutina, where the water itself is so heavily glaciated that the visibility is practically zero, I'm not going to throw a shrimp fly because the fish can't see anything in there. So what I will do though is I will use the yarn on a hook method, and I'll use either a 2/0 or a 3/0 octopus hook. I'm not promoting anybody, but I do use the Gamakatsu hooks. I like them. I feel like they're strong, or the owner hooks. There's a lot of debate whether or not to go to use circle hooks for sockeye when you're doing the flipping method of fishing. I have limited experience using circle hooks for sockeye. I will tell you that the times that I've used them, they seem to be effective. However, I do know that there are some conversations that people have had that who fully and exclusively only use circle hooks for sockeye when doing the flip cast method. And if you want to try them, grab them, let me know how you do with them. And I plan to continue to just add them to my arsenal as I move forward in the future with my sockeye endeavors. But I have found that If I'm fishing outside of the Russian or the Upper Kenai for sockeye, like a 3/0 hook is primarily what I use. So I'm going to show you here how to attach yarn to your hook to go target sockeye. In order to apply yarn to a hook, I use a specific knot on my hook. It's called an egg loop knot. Now, there's a video on our YouTube channel that you can go and reference to find out how to tie an egg loop knot. It does take some dexterity, but from my experience fishing sockeye, using that egg loop knot as a way to attach this small piece of yarn to your hook is an extremely effective thing to do. I've seen some people just kind of wrap yarn around the body, shank of the hook and just sort of do the overhand granny knot. This, in my opinion, secures it there for the longest amount of time. And when you're using an egg loop knot, you really don't need a lot of yarn, a couple inches, 2.5 inches at most, and just run your yarn through the loop, secure it down. And in an area where fishing for sockeye is best done using this type of method, and if this hook conforms to the legal standards that are set forth for that area, this here is a great way to target sockeye. Now, as far as my leader goes, that's 25-pound test monofilament Maxima leader. It's heavily abrasion resistant, and I like this style leader. And one tip I will say to you is that as you're fishing over the course of the day, your leader will get scraped on rocks and any debris that's underneath the water, and there will form small abrasions in that leader. So you have to continually check your leader for abrasions. And what I mean by that, and you even pointing your hook, this is going to hit rocks too. Okay, that can dull it out. So if you can lose fish that way.
All right, as far as hooks goes, like I said, a 3/0 will work when using yarn, J hooks or circle hooks, 2/0, tie an egg loop. Again, we're going to leave some links in this video here, but if you want to look at anything on our YouTube channel, we're really trying to develop a good system here on YouTube where folks can go and do some research before they go out fishing. So you'll see that. Hook sizes for a shrimp fly, 6 to 8 for shrimp flies, 2 or 4 for the Russian river flies, and you need a heavy gauge hook with a sharp point. That's the main thing. We're not using dry fly hooks for these guys. These guys, like I said, once they get in the stream, they can run, and you want your gear to just basically be able to hook them and land them as quickly as possible. Circle hooks, as mentioned in the video, they can reduce the potential to foul hook fish. And as I said, a lot of people are pretty vocal about the benefits of using circle hooks for sockeye. So if it's something you want to try, do it, and please let me know how it works. As I said, I've got limited experience with them, but I have used them before. It's just, if you find these to be beneficial, let me know. Additional gear. So weights, there's a few options of weights. We're going to talk about this in an upcoming video, but this right here is basically a surgical tube where you insert a section of pencil lead. They're called lead clinches, and these guys are available at most sporting goods stores. There's a triple swivel right there. These guys, if you are just using split shots, again, most sporting goods stores and grocery store chains have these. You can go and buy these. You can add them, take them off, whatever. It's easier. So let's look at a couple different rigs that I use when I'm targeting sockeye.
As far as your setup goes for targeting sockeye, it's a relatively simple setup to make. All right, so I've got my reel here, and imagine this is attached to a rod. I've taken out my stretch of line here, and this is coming from my rod. Now I have attached to my braided line a section of monofilament line. Okay, I've got about 2.5, 3 feet of line here. Now you can start, depending on where you're fishing, you're going to want to vary the length, overall length of your leader. If you get up to like a 5 or 6 foot leader, you know, your chance of foul hooking a fish kind of increases, because then you really lose control over that. The line's kind of swinging back and forth. Now, so my preferred starting point is about 4 feet, depending on where I'm fishing. If it's the Kenai and the depth of the water, there's a lot of thought that goes into this when you start fishing. You don't want to just go down there and jump in to a hole and start fishing for sockeye. You want to look at the water. You want to judge by the speed of the water, by how deep the water is, how much weight you're going to need. There's a lot of calculations that can go into it. Or you could just go and start fishing and figure it out as you go. If you go down there and you flip in and you keep getting snagged, take a weight off. If you're not tapping bottom, put more weight on. Simple thing. The main thing is here, you need a barrier between your fishing line, the line that's coming from your reel, and your leader, all right? So I have tied a double uni knot right here to act as a barrier, so as I'm fishing, when these split shots hit that, they're not going to go down any further. Okay, so if you were just to take and run straight monofilament from your line, from your fishing reel, to, you know, in this case, I've got a small shrimp fly at the end of this, and you were to just clip on this split shot weight, chances are over time, those weights are they're going to slide down the line. So you can use a barrel swivel to act as your barrier. You can use, in my case, I just like tying the double uni knots. If you want to know how to tie a double uni knot, we've got another YouTube video which you can check out called How to Tie 4 Basic Fishing Knots. You can check that one out. You can also use a surgeon's knot down there too. Anything that's going to stop those weights from cruising down your line is going to be a benefit to you. So if I was going to the Russian River or the Kenai River, this is probably the rig that I would begin with and probably end with. This is the rig I fish with a lot down there. I'll show you the rig that my go-to rig for fishing Clutina here next. Going to the Clutina River, one of my favorite and preferred methods to use when targeting sockeye is what I use here. I've got line coming from my fishing rod, and then I've got this here, okay? This is pencil weight, pencil lead. It comes in spools, and you can see here we've got a triple swivel, all right? And then from there, I'm running my section of monofilament down to that rig that I demonstrated a second ago, which is the egg loop with that little piece of yarn on it. All right, the main benefit to this is this can kind of go sliding down through rocks. It can fall into crevices and you can pull it out. There's really nothing there to get stuck. Now, it doesn't mean that this is going to be the snag-free rig. It's not. You're still going to probably get snagged, but sometimes what will happen is I found that if this gets kind of wedged in something, it'll just kind of pull out, and then it'll pull out from the rubber holder here, and you can just simply cut off a section of weight, put it in there, and you're good to go, as opposed to tying an entirely new rig on, which if you're fishing sockeye and you're not getting snagged, you should probably consider, you know, maybe adding a little bit more weight. There's really that fine balance, but where you find that if you're getting snagged too much, then you want to take weight off. Whereas if you're not feeling that bottom and you're just ticking along, you know, you really want to find that happy medium where the weight is perfect. Because those sockeye are going to be kind of more toward, you know, they're hanging on the bottom. They're not going to be fluctuating up and down, although sometimes they will. But your best option is to get that weight and feel that weight through your rod taking along the bottom. So again, Clutina rig. My best advice, if you want to go fish Clutina, watch the video that we have on our YouTube channel about, it's called How to Fish for Sockeye on Clutina River, and we're going to leave a link to that video in the description to this video that you're watching right now. Watch it before you go. There's a lot of great information on there.
All right, so we're getting into fishing methods here, and I'll tell you, I don't have a video demonstrating the cast or the flipping method for sockeye. In fact, there's not much of a cast involved. It's basically you're pulling out, you know, as much line as you're going to need. So, you know, if you've got a 9-foot rod, you might pull out an additional, I don't know, you know, 10, 20 feet of line, whatever it is. And the cast is going to be determined by how far you are in relation to where the fish are running. As mentioned before, sockeye are bank runners, and sometimes people will be fishing standing where they should be fishing. So, however, other times, the sockeye might be a little farther out in water column. So the main thing is, though, you're not casting and retrieving, right? You're just doing like you're casting upstream to about a 45-degree angle, and you're following as your line's going down and the weights are clicking the bottom. You're following that with your rod tip, and you're letting your swing go all the way down to where you're basically at the end, where you're basically running parallel with the flow of the water. A lot of times what will happen is that line at the end of that cast will swing, and if you're going to quote unquote floss a fish, that might be the time where your line's going to go into the mouth. So as you do that, when you cast out, make sure you let that cast go all the way out. Don't just flip it up and keep doing that. It's, cast it. Let your cast catch some cover the water column. So you want to hold the rod in one hand and the line in the other. When you're getting ready to cast, you just flip it up and kind of do it like that. And you cast upstream, like I said, about a 45-degree angle, and let the weights tap on the bottom and follow the line down with the tip of your rod. That's extremely important. Don't just cast up and just let the line go. Follow it down with the rod. When it gets to the end of the line, lift up. All right, it's not necessary to do that swift jerking action unless you feel like there's a fish there. Then you're setting the hook. You'll see sometimes folks will be down fishing sockeye and they'll cast out and they'll rip their line through the water. What that can do is it can lead to fish that are foul hooked, and we jokingly refer to that, or I jokingly refer to that as the kenai twitch. Like, you don't need to do that if it's done properly. Sockeye, again, if you're using specific flies, you're going to find they're going to bite that, and sometimes they bite so hard the rod feels like it's going to come out of your hand. However, if you're doing that quote unquote flossing, you might feel the line just stop, or you might feel like an actual small bite, small strike, and then you can set the hook. It's just, if you're flipping and you're just ripping the line out of the water, you might end up with a lot more snag fish than you want. So I want to talk about reading the water, what to look for when you're out on the water. You want to look for inside bends. That's a good suggestion there. Anywhere confluences, like anytime you might have fish that'll kind of stack up in an area where there's the main stem and then there's another little creek or something, you can look for fish in there. An inside bend would be something like this, where the fish are running up. Sometimes they'll hug those inside bends before they kind of spread out. So those inside bends are always a good place to look for fish. You can look for deep holes. The Russian River is a fairly clear river, and if you're walking along the Russian, look for fish. They can sometimes be scattered basically throughout the water. Sometimes they're stacked up near the bank. You just have to look for them. Wearing polarized sunglasses is another good thing for you when you're out there. And look, and take your time. Don't just assume if somebody's up 100 yards upstream fishing that there's fish in front of them. There might be a school of 60 fish, right in front of you, or which are 100 yards down below the person fishing upstream. So take your time, look for fish. Okay. Additional pointers, again, sockeye are bank runners. Don't stand where you should fish. Check your leader line often, as it can get frayed. As I mentioned in the video, you'll get abrasions. Check weights. If they slide down, move them back up. I mean, sockeye fishing is, if you're having to do it for a long time, it's a process. If you get them where, and you're done in 3 casts, good for you. It's a good day. But primarily you're gonna be working for these fish. So just make sure your gear's in tip-top order, so that way if you do hook a fish, you're gonna stand a better chance of landing it. If you're not catching fish and fish are there, like I said, add weight, or you can extend your leader. Really you want to vary your approaches up. If something's not working for you, do something different. And then, like I said, I would start with either maybe there's not enough weight, perhaps your leader line's not long enough, and you're just not getting the right, cast. There's a little bit of a learning curve when you go and start the flipping method for for sockeye. Don't just go out there and just, you know, start thinking you're just going to get one on every cast. You know, if you've never done it before, give yourself some time and learn. It's okay. We've all started there. So I want to talk about what you do when you catch a fish. When you land a fish, bonk it on the head, right? You can use a fish bonker, you can use a rock, stick, whatever you've got available to you. Main thing is sockeye, when they get on the bank, man, they'll flop all over the place, and they get, you know, subdue the fish, get it, just, you're putting meat in your freezer, you know, just end it. Second thing you want to do is you want to cut, but you want to bleed the fish. All right, you can either do that by sticking a knife in the gills, under the gill plate, under the operculum, and cutting, or you can just put your finger in there and pull the gills out. Either way, blood's going to come out of the fish, and it's going to be better for the meat. After you've done that, throw it on a stringer and put them in the water, because you want to bleed the fish in the water. You don't want all the stuff that, you know, dirt and debris and stuff getting on all that stuff. So let them bleed in the water. It's going to keep your fish a lot cleaner. Ice the fish as soon as you can. Cooling it down is going to help improve the quality of your catch, far more than if you leave it laying on a bank and collecting all kinds of stuff. So vacuum seal your fillets in portion sizes. If you fillet on the river, be sure to chop and throw pieces in the fast moving water. Again, this is to reduce the potential for critters coming down to the edge of the river and finding meals that, you know, anglers who are just kind of sloppily leaving stuff around are there. So again, there's a nice set of beautiful sockeye fillets. That's what we're all after. So I want to talk about some online resources. Again, we've got the How to Fish for Clutina River Red Salmon video available on our YouTube channel. We've also got the How to Tie a Crystal Shrimp Fly on our YouTube channel. We've got our wefishak.alaska.gov, which is a resource for anglers. And we've also got a recent video which we uploaded called How to Can Salmon. And again, these three here are on YouTube, and this one will have a link to our YouTube video. So as you can tell, we're really happy with YouTube, and we're really trying to, you know, get a lot of stuff up on there. If you follow us on social media, we are on Instagram at WeFishAK. We do encourage folks to use the hashtag WeFishAK to share their story. On our Facebook, we're at WeFishAK on Facebook. We've got the ADF&G Ship Creek Fisheries Center, Sport Fishing South Central, Sport Fishing Interior Alaska, and there's also the Maine Alaska Department of Fish and Game Facebook page. So we're out there to be in communication with the angling public. So, and we've also got, as I mentioned a bunch of times already, in which you're already on right now, the YouTube channel. So I want to say thank you. I also want to invite you to remain in contact with me. You'll find my email address on our website. In fact, I'll just say it's Ryan, RYAN.RAGAN @alaska.gov. If you ever have any questions, you can search the website and find my name and number. You can also contact our Sport Fish Information Center here in Anchorage, which is 267-2218. And I hope to see you guys out on the water, and I really appreciate you watching this presentation.
The little dots at more, and then you'll go to stop recording.